My son didn't steal my car. He did something worse. He made it disappear slowly, right in front of me, until I started questioning whether I was supposed to miss it at all. The realization hit me standing barefoot in my hallway, purse on my shoulder, coat buttoned, keys cold in my palm. The house was quiet in that unnatural way that only happens when you're about to leave, but something isn't right. I stared at the front door, ready to go, ready to drive, ready to live my day the way I always had, and then my body froze. The driveway outside was empty, not freshly empty, comfortably empty, like it had been that way long enough for nobody to feel guilty about it anymore. I lowered my hand slowly and looked at the keys. They were mine. The SUV was not. That was when the thought slid into my chest, sharp and unwelcome. I don't remember the last time I drove myself anywhere. The memory didn't come all at once. It crept. A few weeks earlier, I had asked James for the car casually, the way you do when you assume nothing has changed. He didn't even hesitate. "It's already with them," he said. Not apologetic, not careful, just factual. I remember blinking, standing at my kitchen counter with the phone pressed to my ear, watching sunlight stretch across a floor I had paid for. "With who?" I asked. There was a pause. Small, practiced. "Vanessa's mom," he replied. "She needed it for a bit." For a bit became a rhythm. Excuses became routine, and my life adjusted itself without my permission. I walked instead of drove. I canceled things instead of asking questions. I waited for rides instead of demanding answers. Every time I reached for independence, someone gently redirected me, like I was being trained without knowing it. The words were always soft. Insurance, convenience, timing. Nothing that sounded cruel enough to fight. Nothing that sounded serious enough to stop. That morning in the hallway, the truth settled heavier than anger. This wasn't temporary. This was decided. I called James again. He answered like he expected me. "Ma? I need the car today," I said. Clean. Direct. Silent stretch just long enough to make my stomach tighten. "They still got it," he replied. "I told you." "When is it coming back?" I asked. He sighed, irritation dressed up as patience. "You don't really drive like that anymore," he said. And just like that, my life was rewritten. In one sentence, I was never asked to approve. I ended the call without arguing. I didn't want him to hear my breathing change. I sat down instead and stared at my hands, realizing something that scared me more than the car being gone. I had been slowly convinced to accept less space in my own life. If you're listening to this right now, wherever you are, type where you're watching from in the comments. Not because I need to know, but because moments like this hit differently depending on whether you've ever been quietly pushed aside by people who swear they love you. My name is Rose Owens. I raised my son to be strong, capable, and confident. I did not raise him to decide when my independence expires. That day, I didn't drive. I walked. I waited. I adjusted. And I told myself all the same lies women my age tell ourselves when peace feels safer than conflict. Family first. Don't make it a thing. It'll come back. But days passed, then weeks, and the absence stopped feeling temporary and started feeling intentional. The moment it finally broke me wasn't dramatic. It was standing at that same front window later that week, watching another car pull into my driveway, someone else's, and realizing my world had gotten smaller without a single argument. I hadn't stopped driving because I was tired. I hadn't stopped driving because I was incapable. I had stopped because someone decided I didn't need to go anywhere on my own anymore. And I let them. My phone rang while I was rinsing the dust off my hands in the kitchen sink, and the sound of it made my shoulders tighten like I'd been caught doing something wrong. I dried my fingers slowly on a dish towel I'd already used twice, then stared at the screen before I answered. Because lately, every call felt like somebody else deciding what part of my life they wanted to speak on. The name flashing there wasn't James. It wasn't Vanessa. It was Colin, my brother. The one person who could speak plain without trying to manage me. I answered on the second ring, keeping my voice steady as if nothing in my house had shifted. "Hey," I said. His tone came through casual, almost light, like he was calling to talk about the weather or a game on TV. "Hey, Rose, you busy?" "Not busy," I told him, and that was the truth, but it tasted strange in my mouth. I hadn't been busy lately. I'd been waiting. "Good," he said. "I was driving past the pharmacy on my side and thought about you. How you holding up?" I leaned my hip against the counter and glanced toward the living room. Leonard sat in the same chair, same posture, television murmuring low. He didn't look toward me. He never did when the phone rang now. He had started acting like sound was something you could refuse to hear if you stayed still enough. "I'm fine," I said. "Just doing small errands." Colin chuckled softly, not amused, more like he didn't believe me but didn't want to embarrass me with the truth. "Small errands," he repeated. Then his voice changed. Not dramatic, just sharpened the way a knife does when it stops being a utensil and starts being a tool. "Why haven't you been driving?" I blinked once, slow. The question landed too clean, too direct, like he'd been watching from a distance and finally decided to say what nobody else would. I lowered my voice without thinking, the way you do in a house where you don't want to start something. "What you mean?" Colin didn't rise to it. He stayed steady. "I mean, I called you 2 weeks ago and you said James was taking you. I called you last week and you said you were just staying in. I called today and you sound like you're walking on eggshells in your own kitchen. I'm asking a simple thing." He paused, then said it again, slower. "Why haven't you been driving?" My eyes drifted toward the key hook on the wall by the back door. My key ring hung there like decoration. I felt something inside me try to defend James automatically, like my body had learned to protect him before my mind had a chance to decide if he deserved it. "The SUV's not here," I admitted. "It's with Vanessa's people for a little while." Colin didn't say, "Oh." He didn't say, "Okay." He made a low sound in his throat, the kind that isn't anger yet but is already stepping toward it. "For a little while," he repeated, and I could hear him breathing through his nose, controlled, measuring. "Rose, whose name is that SUV in?" The question turned the air heavy. I gripped the edge of the counter, not because I was about to fall, but because I suddenly felt stupid for not knowing. I had always known. I used to know every detail of my life because I had to. Then somewhere along the way, I started letting people answer things for me. "My name," I said at first, too quickly, because it felt right to say. Then my throat tightened. "I think." Colin didn't let me slide past it. "You think?" he echoed, and his voice was so quiet it made me sit up straighter. "Rose, stop. Don't guess with me. Whose name is on the title?" I swallowed. The truth was ugly, not because the answer was shocking, but because I didn't have it. "I don't know," I said, and the words felt like handing my pride over in both hands. Silence pressed against my ear for a second. In the background, I heard the faint hum of his car, a turn signal clicking, a world moving forward while mine sat stalled. Then Colin spoke again, softer. Not kinder, just more precise. "You remember when you bought it?" he said. "I was the one sitting in that dealership with you, flipping through the options. You had them bring out 3 different models. You said you didn't work your whole life to ride in something that felt like a tin can. You were so proud you called me twice just to tell me you finally found the one that fit you." His voice dipped with memory, and I hated how my eyes burned at the corners because pride was the one thing I didn't want to cry over. "Yeah," I whispered. "I remember." Colin exhaled slowly. "Then you need to know whose name it's in." I looked toward the living room again. Leonard's head tilted slightly, like he could sense the tension without wanting to own it. James wasn't in sight, probably somewhere on his phone, somewhere confident. I lowered my voice further, like this secret belonged to shame. "Colin, it's just for a few days. That's what they said." Another pause. Longer this time. not punishment. Calculation. The kind of silence that means somebody is building a thought they don't want to speak too soon. When Colin finally spoke, his voice was gentle in a way that scared me more than anger. "We'll talk when I see you," he said. I didn't drive there. That was the point. I rode with James in his car 2 days after Colin's call, sitting in the passenger seat like I was being transported instead of living my own life. He played the radio low, one hand on the wheel, the other tapping the screen at red lights, and he didn't talk much, like silence could smooth over anything that was starting to show. I watched houses pass by through the window and tried to keep my face calm, because I didn't want him to see what I was thinking. I didn't want to give him the satisfaction of knowing I had finally noticed the shape of what he'd been doing. When we turned into Patricia Green's neighborhood, I felt my stomach tighten in a way that had nothing to do with fear and everything to do with disrespect. The streets were clean and quiet, lawns edged like somebody cared about appearances more than comfort. James slowed as we reached the driveway and pulled in without asking me if I wanted to come. He just assumed I would follow him like I always did. I stepped out, and the cold air hit my cheeks, and before James even shut his door, I saw it. My SUV sat in that driveway like it belonged there, not parked like a guest, settled like a resident. The sun caught the paint the way it always did, soft and expensive, and for a second my chest tightened with the memory of my own hands on that steering wheel, my own decision to buy something that made me feel safe and proud at the same time. The vehicle looked the same. The world around it didn't. James walked ahead of me, keys in his hand. My keys, hanging off his fingers like they had never been mine to begin with. He didn't look back to see if I was coming. I stood there a beat too long, letting the sight of it sink into me, letting the message speak without words. They didn't hide it because they didn't think they had to. Patricia opened the front door before James even knocked, like she'd been watching through the window. She was dressed neatly, hair set, face composed, the kind of woman who always looked ready for company even when she wasn't expecting any. She smiled wide, warm, practiced. "James," she said, voice bright. Then her eyes slid to me, and the smile didn't change shape, but something in it tightened, like she was recalculating how to be polite without giving away too much. "Rose," she added, like she just remembered my name was attached to the car sitting behind us. "Patricia," I said, and kept my tone even. I didn't want to come in hot. Heat gives people an excuse to call you unreasonable. Patricia stepped aside to let James through first. He moved like a man who belonged there, like the air in that house was made for him. I followed, slower, because I was paying attention to everything. The smell inside was clean, lemon polish, something baked, a quiet kind of wealth that never raised its voice. Vanessa was in the living room, perched on the edge of a couch like she was waiting for someone to judge her posture. When she saw me, her eyes flicked down and up again, quick. Then she stood. "Hey, Ma," she said, too cheerful, too light, like we were meeting for lunch, not standing inside the house where my property had been parked like a donation. I nodded once. No hug, no warmth. I wasn't going to pretend. Patricia kept talking, filling the space, because women like her can sense tension the way they sense smoke. "I told James he didn't have to bring you by," she said, as if the reason I was there was a courtesy visit. "But he said you were on your way out and it made sense." That phrase again made sense. It sat in the air like a soft weapon. I looked past her through the front window where the SUV was visible, bold as daylight. "You've been driving it," I said, not accusing, just stating fact. Patricia's smile stayed in place. She didn't glance back at the driveway. She didn't flinch. She simply nodded, like I had pointed out that the sky was blue. "Oh yes," she said, "just a little. It's a nice ride." She stepped closer, lowering her voice slightly, not to hide anything, but to make it feel intimate, neighborly, like we were two women sharing practical wisdom. "Your son said you don't really drive much anymore." The sentence landed gentle, almost sweet. That's what made it cruel. She said it like it was a truth everyone had agreed on, like my own habits had been discussed and decided without me. I didn't answer right away. I felt something rise in my throat, pride, anger, disbelief, and I swallowed it down because I wanted to see how far this lie had traveled. James stood behind Patricia, scrolling on his phone again, casual, bored. Vanessa folded her arms lightly, watching my face like she was studying whether I would embarrass her. Patricia kept her expression smooth, her posture relaxed, waiting for me to accept the story she'd been given. That was when I understood something that made my skin go cold. It wasn't just that they had my car. It was that they had already explained my absence in a way that made it sound reasonable. They had taken my life and translated it into a version where I didn't exist fully, where I was an older woman who didn't need much, didn't go much, didn't drive much. That version of me was convenient. It made the theft feel like help. I stared at Patricia's smile, then at James's calm face, and I realized my silence hadn't just protected peace. It had given them space to narrate me into a smaller woman. Leonard didn't say a word when we pulled back into our driveway. James parked, killed the engine, and walked inside ahead of me like he had delivered something safely, and that was the end of it. I stood for a second beside the car that wasn't mine, breathing in cold air, trying to settle the shaking that wanted to start in my hands. Not from fear, from that deep kind of anger that comes when someone smiles in your face and talks about you like you're already fading. I didn't go inside right away. I needed a moment where nobody could watch me decide what to do next. When I finally stepped into the house, the warmth hit my cheeks, and the television sound greeted me like it always did. Low, steady, pretending nothing in this home ever changed. Leonard was in the living room, exactly where I'd left him earlier, remote in one hand, eyes forward. He didn't glance up when I came in. He didn't ask how it went. James moved through the kitchen, opening cabinets, acting busy, acting innocent. I watched Leonard's face for a beat too long. He looked peaceful. That's what hurt. Peace was what he protected, even when it cost me. I didn't confront James, not yet. James wanted confrontation. Confrontation would let him turn me into the problem. I went straight for Leonard because Leonard was the one person in this house who could stop James with a look if he chose to. I stood beside his chair, close enough for him to feel my presence, and waited until he finally turned his head slightly. His eyes met mine for a brief moment, then drifted back to the TV like he was checking something and decided he didn't want it. "Leonard," I said quietly. My voice didn't rise. It didn't tremble. "The SUV is at Patricia Green's house." Leonard's jaw shifted once, a small movement like he had heard me but didn't want to accept the weight of it. He clicked the volume down 2 notches, slow, deliberate, as if lowering the sound could lower the tension. "Rose?" he murmured, and my name came out like a warning, not for James, but for me. I waited. Leonard sighed and leaned back, eyes still on the screen. "Let's not start this again," he said. The words were soft, almost tender, like he thought he was protecting me from stress. But I heard what he really meant. Let's not disturb the way things have been arranged. "Again," I repeated, my voice still calm. "So you know it's been happening." Leonard's eyes flicked toward the hallway where James had disappeared. He didn't answer my question. He chose the safest route, the one he always chose. Avoid direct blame, avoid direct conflict. "Christmas is soon," he said, like a holiday could be used as a lid on boiling water. "We don't need all this." All this. My car, my dignity, my voice shrinking in other people's mouths. I stared at him until he looked away. "You don't need all this," I corrected gently. "I've been living in it." Leonard's throat worked like he was swallowing something he didn't want to taste. He kept his eyes on the TV. "James said it's temporary," he offered, and it was the first time he'd mentioned James in a sentence like that. Like James's word was a kind of authority that settled questions. He said it makes sense. That phrase again. I felt my stomach tighten. Did James tell you that before it happened? I asked. Or after? Leonard didn't answer. His fingers tightened slightly around the remote. That was his answer. After. Always after. I sat down on the edge of the couch opposite him, not because I was tired, but because I wanted him to look at me without the excuse of me towering over him. Leonard, I said, slower now. Patricia looked me in my face and told me James said I don't really drive much anymore. Leonard's eyes flickered again, this time a hint of discomfort. Not outrage, not protection. Discomfort, like he didn't like the sound of it but didn't want to carry the weight of fixing it. People talk, he said, dismissive, like words couldn't reshape a woman's life. I leaned forward slightly. No, I said, they don't talk. They repeat what they've been told. Leonard's lips pressed together. He didn't deny it. He just sat there, choosing quiet like quiet was a virtue. I could hear James moving in the kitchen, cups, drawers, small sounds of ownership. Leonard finally turned his head and looked at me fully, and for a second I saw something in his eyes that almost looked like apology. But it didn't turn into action. It turned into another attempt to smooth things over. We'll handle it after the holidays, he said. Let's just get through Christmas. I nodded once because I heard what he was truly asking for. Let me keep my peace a little longer, even if you lose yours. I stood up, slow, and walked toward the hallway. Leonard called my name softly like he wanted me to come back and be agreeable again. I didn't. I went to my bedroom and closed the door behind me. I stood there for a long moment staring at my dresser, at the neatness I'd always kept, and I realized something that made my chest ache in a way tears couldn't fix. Leonard's silence wasn't neutral. It was a choice. And every time he chose it, it cost me a little more ground. Christmas was coming, and the house was already arranged for me to be smaller in it. James didn't bring it up again that night, and neither did Leonard. The house moved around me like I was furniture, present, useful, not to be disturbed. The next morning I found James at the kitchen table with his phone propped against a mug, tapping through something with the calm of a man handling his own business. Vanessa sat beside him, not eating, just watching the screen like it held instructions for how to live. When I walked in, neither of them jumped. No guilt, no scrambling. That steadiness was what made my skin feel tight. James looked up and smiled like he was greeting me for breakfast, not like he had parked my independence in another woman's driveway. "Morning, Ma," he said, easy. "Sit down." I didn't sit. I leaned against the counter and crossed my arms, not defensive, anchored. "I saw my car at Patricia's," I said. The words came out plain, no heat, no begging. Vanessa's eyes flicked toward James quickly, then back down. James nodded once, like we were discussing a package delivery. "Yeah," he said. "That's what I told you." I waited, letting the silence stretch long enough to make him fill it. James cleared his throat the way he always did when he was about to explain something he believed should end the conversation. "Ma, you're making this heavier than it is," he said. "It's practical." Practical. The word sat on the table between us like a paperweight. "Explain," I said. James sat back in his chair and spread his hands slightly, as if he were about to teach me something simple. "Insurance," he began, counting off with his fingers. "That SUV costs more to insure than most people's rent. You don't drive like you used to. Half the time it's sitting, and if something happens, God forbid, everybody's going to be looking at us. Liability, Ma. People sue for anything these days." He said it smoothly, like he'd rehearsed it in his head and decided it sounded responsible. Vanessa nodded once, small and careful, like she was agreeing with the concept, not the behavior. "So the solution," I said, "was to give it to Patricia." James exhaled, not irritated, impatient like I was stuck on a detail. "Not give," he corrected. "Just park it there for now. Her mom's got space, and she's been needing something reliable. Her car's been acting up." He leaned forward slightly, voice dropping into that tone men use when they want you to stop thinking and start trusting. It just makes sense. That phrase again, the same phrase Leonard had borrowed like it was wisdom. I looked at Vanessa. Did her car break down, I asked, or did y'all decide my car was easier? Vanessa's lips pressed together. She didn't answer directly. My mom's been having a hard time, she said, careful, and James was just trying to help. It's not like we're trying to take anything from you. The way she said take made my stomach turn, like the only wrong would be if they admitted it. James nodded along with her, relief in his eyes that she'd spoken, that the room still felt like it belonged to him. Exactly, he said. Nobody's taking from you. We're helping the family. The family. That was another word that swallowed women whole. Helping the family, I repeated, tasting it, by telling people I don't really drive anymore. James's face shifted, just slightly. Not guilt, annoyance. Ma, he said, that's not what I meant. You know how folks talk. Her mom asked why it was there. I said, you don't drive much. That's true. His eyes held mine like he expected me to accept his version of truth. Sometimes you don't, he continued. Sometimes you say you're tired. Sometimes you say you don't feel like going out. So what am I supposed to say? That my mom's just stubborn about holding on to things she doesn't use? Vanessa's eyes lifted then. Quick. Not shock. Agreement. Like she'd said something similar to him before. I felt heat rise behind my ribs, but I kept my voice even. I don't drive because you've made it hard for me to drive, I said. James laughed once, a small sound with no joy in it. See, that right there, he said, pointing lightly. That's what I mean. You're making it personal. This is about logistics. He pushed his phone aside, finally giving me his full attention like I should be grateful. Listen, he said, you don't need a 150K SUV to go to the pharmacy. I'll take you. Leonard can take you. We can order deliveries. We're trying to reduce stress. Reduce stress. The words felt like a blanket being pressed over my mouth. I looked toward the living room doorway. Leonard was there now, half in shadow, pretending he had just wandered in, pretending he hadn't been listening the whole time. He met my eyes for a split second, then looked away. James followed my gaze and softened his tone, performing. Ma, nobody's against you, he said. We're just being smart. These days, people lose everything over one accident, one bad situation. We're protecting you. Vanessa reached for James's hand under the table, squeezing lightly as if to steady him, not me. I watched them, the way they sat together like a united front, and I understood that practical wasn't a reason. It was a mask, a clean word to hide control. James stood up and walked to the counter near the mail basket. He lifted a stack of envelopes and flyers, rifled through them with casual confidence, then looked back at me with a small, tired smile. We can show you, he said. It's all on paper anyway. When James said, it's all on paper, he said it like paper was proof of good intentions, like ink could only be used for honesty. I didn't answer him right away. I watched the way he held that stack of mail, loose, confident, like my life was another envelope he could sort through with one hand. Vanessa stayed seated, eyes on me now, waiting to see if I would raise my voice, waiting to see if I would give her a reason to label me difficult. Leonard hovered in the doorway like a man who wanted the credit of being present without the responsibility of being involved. I walked past them and into the hallway, slow, because I didn't want James to feel like he'd pushed me anywhere. I went to my bedroom and closed the door behind me. The quiet inside that room felt thicker than it should have, like it had been holding things I wasn't ready to name. I sat on the edge of my bed and stared at my dresser where I kept everything important in neat stacks. Insurance cards, old receipts, warranties, the kind of papers you keep when you've worked hard for what you have. My hands moved on their own, opening drawers, sliding folders out, flipping through labels. Not frantic, determined. I didn't know what I was looking for yet. I just knew it wasn't right for my son to say, "It's on paper," when I had never seen the paper. And the moment I admitted that to myself, the memory came back with an ugly clarity, like my mind had been hiding it until I was finally brave enough to look straight at it. It had happened on a weekday afternoon, not long after I'd stopped driving. James came over with Vanessa, both of them dressed like they were running errands, casual, smiling too much. He held a manila folder in his hand like it was something harmless. "Ma," he said, standing in my doorway, "we just need you to sign something quick so we can get the insurance sorted." I remember thinking it was strange because I'd handled insurance for decades. Leonard had never been the one to do it, and James sure hadn't been either. But James said it with such confidence, and Vanessa stood beside him, nodding like it was normal, like it was routine family business. My body had been tired that day, not sick, not fragile, just tired in a way that made me want the easiest path. James stepped into my kitchen and laid the folder on the table. "It's just paperwork," he said, flipping it open. "You don't have to read all that. It's standard." I remember looking at the pages and seeing words in small print, blocks of text, boxes and lines. It wasn't one page, it was several. My eyes snagged on a section that looked important, something with my name typed out more than once. I reached for my glasses. James's hand landed on the paper lightly, not grabbing, just guiding, like he was helping me cross a street. "Ma, don't stress yourself," he said. His voice was gentle. That's what I hated about it. "Vanessa's mom is just going to be driving it a few days. This keeps everything clean. You know how insurance is." He used that word clean like it meant safe. Vanessa leaned in, voice soft. "We just don't want anything to fall back on you," she said. "It's protection. Protection. Practical. Clean." They kept using words that sounded like care. I remember my pen felt heavier than it should have. I remember thinking I should ask more questions. I remember Leonard sitting in the living room with the TV on, not in the kitchen with me, even though he was home. I remember glancing toward the hallway like I wanted him to appear and ask what was going on so I wouldn't have to. He didn't. James slid the page toward me and tapped a line with his finger. "Right there," he said, "then initial here." I hesitated, and for a second James's smile tightened at the corners. Vanessa's eyes narrowed slightly, then softened again, like she was adjusting her face back into kindness. James noticed my hesitation and leaned closer. "Ma," he said, lowering his voice, "don't make this hard. You know I'm trying to help. You always say you want peace. This is peace." That sentence is what did it. Not the paper, not the ink. The way he used my own values against me. I signed. Not because I agreed with everything on that page, because I didn't know what everything was. I signed because I believed my son wouldn't put something in front of me that would take from me. I signed because his voice made me feel like not signing would be selfish. I signed because Leonard didn't come in. After I signed, James closed the folder fast, too fast. He didn't hand me a copy. He didn't say, "Here, keep this." He didn't even leave it on the table for me to look at after they left. He tucked it under his arm like it belonged to him and kissed my cheek like he'd just done something sweet. "See?" he said. "Easy." The memory ended there, and the room around me came back. I sat on my bed with my hands clenched in my lap, staring at the folders I'd pulled out, and the cold truth settled in. I didn't have a single copy of what I signed. Not one. Colin came over the next day, not announced, not scheduled. That was how my brother moved when something in his spirit didn't sit right. No long phone calls, no back and forth, just a knock at the door and a look on his face that told you the conversation was already happening in his head. When I opened the door and saw him standing on my porch in a dark jacket with his hands in his pockets, I felt a strange mix of relief and shame. Relief, because somebody had finally stepped into my house with clear eyes. Shame, because I didn't want my brother to see how quiet I'd become. "Hey," he said softly, stepping in before I could pretend I was fine. He didn't hug me right away. He looked at my face first, like he was checking for bruises you can't see. "You all right?" "I'm all right," I answered, and my voice sounded steadier than I felt. Leonard's television hummed low in the living room. James's car wasn't in the driveway. The house felt too open, like it had been emptied of authority. Colin walked into the kitchen and set his keys on the counter without asking, like he was claiming a space that belonged to our blood. He looked around once, taking in the neatness, the silence, the way everything was in its place and nothing felt safe. "Sit," he said, and it wasn't rude. It was protective. I sat at the kitchen table where James had laid that folder in front of me. My fingers touched the wood, and I could almost feel the ghost of that pen in my hand. Colin pulled a chair out and sat across from me, shoulders squared, eyes calm. He didn't start with accusations. He started with facts. "Tell me what happened," he said. I opened my mouth and realized how many versions of the story lived inside me. James's version, Leonard's version, Patricia's version, Vanessa's version. I had been holding all of them like plates, trying not to drop any. Colin waited, patient, not filling the silence, letting me find my own voice again. "The SUV," I began, and my throat tightened. "It's at Patricia Green's house. James said it makes sense. Insurance, liability. Vanessa's mom needed something reliable." Colin's jaw shifted once. "And you're riding in James's car," he said, not a question. "Or walking." I didn't answer that part. I nodded slightly. Colin leaned forward. "Do you have your keys?" I glanced toward the hook by the back door. My keys were there, but they might as well have been a picture. "They're hanging up," I said. Colin's eyes narrowed, not in anger at me, but in concentration. "Do you have paperwork?" he asked. My stomach dropped. I told him about the folder, about the day they came over smiling too much, about James saying I didn't have to read it all, about Vanessa's voice soft and steady, saying it was protection, about James tapping the line and telling me not to make it hard. As I spoke, I heard myself the way I would hear another woman telling me this story, and it made my skin crawl. Colin didn't interrupt. He didn't shake his head. He didn't curse. He just listened like every sentence was a piece of a puzzle he already knew how to solve. When I told him they didn't leave me a copy, his eyes lifted sharply for the first time. "You don't have one page," he said, voice low. "Not one," I whispered. Colin sat back slowly, letting that land. The silence stretched, and I realized Leonard had turned the TV down in the other room, like even he could feel the temperature shifting. Colin's eyes moved toward the living room doorway, then back to me. "Leonard was home when you signed?" he asked. I hesitated. "He was in the house," I said carefully. "He wasn't in the kitchen." Colin nodded once, almost to himself. Then he asked about Patricia. I told him what she said, smiling in my face, telling me James said I don't really drive much anymore. I told him how James stood behind her scrolling on his phone like he was bored by my confusion. I told him Vanessa watched my expression like she was measuring how much trouble I might cause. Colin's hands stayed flat on the table the whole time. That was what scared me. He wasn't reacting like a brother who wanted to fight. He was reacting like a man watching a storm form and deciding where to stand when it hit. "Rose," he said finally, and his voice softened, the way it did when we were children and I had scraped my knee and tried not to cry. "Look at me." I lifted my eyes. Colin held my gaze steady. "When James brought that folder," he said slowly, "were you alone when you signed?" The question cut through everything like a blade. Not, "What did it say?" Not, "Why did you trust him?" Not, "How could you let this happen?" Just that one question. I felt my chest tighten because I understood what he was really asking. He wasn't asking about the room. He was asking whether there had been anybody there to protect me, anybody there to witness, anybody there to make James behave. I was sitting at the table, I said, voice thin. James was across from me. Vanessa was beside him. Colin didn't blink. "Was anyone on your side?" he asked, still calm. I swallowed. "No," I admitted. Leonard was in the other room. Colin went still, completely still. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was heavy with meaning I couldn't yet name. He stared at the table for a long moment, then lifted his eyes back to mine. His face didn't show anger. It showed certainty. "That matters," he said. The morning of Christmas dinner arrived with a strange kind of quiet, the kind that doesn't feel peaceful. It feels staged. Leonard moved around the house like he was stepping through a routine he didn't want to disturb. James texted once, short, confident, already in control of the day. Vanessa sent a message after that with a smiley face at the end, like we were all fine. I stood in, my bedroom with my coat on and my purse in my hand, staring at the hook by the back door where my SUV keys still hung. They looked normal. That was the insult. Everything that belonged to me still sat in my house, neat and useless, while my life moved without my consent. Leonard called from the hallway. "You ready?" His voice held no urgency, no apology, like we were going somewhere ordinary, like my chest wasn't tight with the weight of things nobody would say out loud. "I'm ready," I answered. And then, instead of walking toward the driveway, Leonard reached for his phone. He didn't even look at me when he did it. He just tapped the screen twice, the way James did when he wanted to control something quickly. "I called a taxi," he said. The words landed soft, almost casual, but I felt them hit my pride like a slap. I stared at him. "A taxi," I repeated. Leonard finally glanced at me, eyes tired. "It's easier," he said, and that phrase, easier, sat right beside practical and clean and made sense. All the little words people use when they don't want to say the ugly truth. We're avoiding a fight we should have had. "James said the SUV is still over there," Leonard added, not meeting my gaze. Over there. He couldn't even say Patricia's name. He couldn't say my car. He couldn't say mine. I held my purse tighter. "So we're showing up in a taxi," I said quietly. Leonard nodded once. "Just for today," he murmured, like Christmas could excuse anything. I didn't argue. Not because I agreed, because I didn't want Leonard to feel relieved by my silence. I wanted him to sit in it, to feel how wrong it was without me having to perform pain for him. The taxi arrived 10 minutes later, a clean sedan with a driver who didn't look up much. Leonard opened the back door for me like he was being gentlemanly. I slid into the seat and the smell inside, air freshener and faint leather, made me think of my SUV, the way it smelled when it was still new, the way I'd run my fingers over the steering wheel and felt proud. Leonard climbed in beside me, and as the taxi pulled away, I looked back at my house through the rear window. The driveway looked empty and wrong. The road to James's place felt longer than it should have, not because of distance, but because every mile reminded me I was traveling without my own wheels. Leonard stared out his window like he was watching scenery. I watched my reflection in the glass, the set of my mouth, the quiet anger in my eyes, and I promised myself I would not shrink tonight. Not in front of James, not in front of Vanessa, not in front of anybody who benefited from me being small. When we arrived, James's house was lit up with holiday warmth. Wreath on the door, lights trimmed clean along the roofline, everything arranged to look like a happy family. The taxi slowed at the curb, and I felt Leonard's body stiffen beside me, as if he understood too late how this would look. "We could have taken my car," Leonard muttered, but it sounded weak, like a man offering solutions after the damage. I didn't respond. The driver stopped, and Leonard paid quickly, too quickly, as if throwing money at the moment could erase the humiliation. He stepped out first and reached a hand toward me. I took it, not because I needed help, but because I refused to look unsteady. The cold air hit my face again, and as I stood on the sidewalk in front of my son's home, I felt eyes on me before I even saw anyone. James opened the door as if he'd been waiting. Vanessa appeared behind him, dressed nicely, hair smooth, smile ready. And then, from the living room, Colin stood up. My brother. He didn't come outside. He just stepped closer to the doorway and looked past James, straight at me. His eyes dropped, quick, to the curb, to the taxi, then back to my face. The look he gave me wasn't surprise. It was recognition, like he had expected something like this. But the reality of it still offended him. James's smile widened when he saw me, but it wasn't warmth. It was satisfaction. "Ma," he said loudly enough for the house to hear, "you made it." Vanessa stepped forward and kissed my cheek lightly, perfume sweet, gesture quick. "Merry Christmas," she sang. Leonard mumbled it back. I stepped inside, keeping my posture tall, and the room around me filled with polite noise. Music playing softly, plates clinking, relatives talking in low holiday tones. People turned to look, not openly, just little glances that slid away when I caught them. The kind of looks people give when they see something off but don't want to admit they noticed. James closed the door behind us, sealing me inside the performance. Colin moved closer, his face calm but his jaw tight. He leaned toward me slightly, voice low enough that only I could hear. "You rode here in a taxi," he said, not accusing, confirming. I held his gaze and nodded once. Colin's eyes flicked again toward Leonard, then back to me. His mouth pressed into a line, and I felt the air shift around him, like the room had just gained weight. He stepped back half a pace, letting his eyes travel toward the empty driveway outside, toward the space where my SUV should have been if this family still respected me. Then he looked at James. His voice rose just enough to cut through the holiday chatter without sounding like a scene. "Rose," he said, using the name he'd called me since childhood when he wanted my full attention. "What about the 150K SUV your husband gave you?" For a half second after Colin asked his question, the room went quieter without fully going silent. The music kept playing, a soft holiday song that didn't match the weight that had just dropped in the middle of the living room. People kept holding their plates, kept pretending to smile, but their eyes shifted, quick, curious, hungry. I felt Leonard stiffen beside me like a man who wanted to disappear into his own coat. Vanessa's smile froze in place, still pretty, still polite, but tight at the corners. And James, my son, didn't look startled. He didn't look ashamed. He looked like he'd been waiting for this moment, like he believed he had the right words to shut it down. Colin stood near the doorway, calm but solid, his question hanging in the air like a blade that hadn't cut yet. I didn't speak, not because I had nothing to say, but because I wanted to see who would speak for me this time. I wanted to see who believed they owned my story. James took a step forward and let out a small laugh, the kind men use when they want to make a serious thing sound petty. "Uncle Colin," he said, voice light, like this was playful, "why you bringing that up today?" Colin didn't move. He didn't smile. "I asked you," he said simply. James glanced at Vanessa, quick, then back to Colin. Then, like he was putting on a show, he looked at me. "Ma," he said, as if he was offering me a chance to answer and save everyone discomfort. I kept my face still. I didn't look down. I didn't look away. I let the silence do what it was meant to do. James's eyes narrowed slightly, a flicker of irritation. Then he turned back to Colin and shrugged with practiced ease. "My mother-in-law owns it now," he said. The words landed clean, confident, like he was announcing a smart decision, not a theft dressed in good manners. I felt Leonard's breath catch beside me. Vanessa's shoulders relaxed a fraction, like she'd been holding herself tight and finally decided this explanation would be enough. Someone across the room let out a small, uncomfortable laugh, the kind that tries to glue a room back together when it's cracking. Colin stared at James, unblinking. "Owns it," Colin repeated slow. James nodded. He even smiled like he was proud of how reasonable he sounded. "Yeah," he said. "It just made more sense. Her mom needed something reliable. Ma doesn't really drive like that anymore." His voice softened on the last part, like he was trying to sound caring. Then he added the line that made my stomach go cold. He tilted his head slightly and said, almost kindly, "It fits her better. Fits her better." Like I was an outfit somebody had outgrown. Like my life was a hand-me-down being reassigned. The room did what rooms do when people want to avoid discomfort. It accepted the lie because it came wrapped in calm. A few heads nodded, a few mouths pressed into polite little smiles. Someone murmured, "Well, practicality." And another voice responded, "Families help families." Like those words could cover anything. I watched it happen in real time, how quickly people will choose the version that keeps dinner pleasant, even if it makes a woman disappear. Vanessa stepped closer to James and rested her hand lightly on his arm, a quiet claim of unity. Her eyes cut toward me, quick, checking if I would break. Leonard shifted beside me and cleared his throat, but he didn't speak. He never did when it counted. I stood there in the center of it, feeling my own heartbeat steady, not racing, steady. A calm anger is a different kind of power. Colin didn't react the way the room expected. He didn't yell, he didn't throw his hands up, he didn't give them the entertainment of a loud fight. He just stared at James with a look that made the air feel colder. "So you're telling me," Colin said, voice even, "your mother rode here in a taxi, because her own SUV fits your wife's mother better." James's smile thinned. "Uncle Colin, don't twist it," he said, and the patience in his voice was fake now. I could hear the edge. Colin took one slow step forward. Not aggressive, deliberate. The way a man moves when he's done being polite. "I'm not twisting anything," Colin said. "I'm repeating what you said." He glanced at me then, just for a second, and that look held something that made my throat tighten, an apology on behalf of the whole room, and a promise that he wasn't going to let this slide into dinner conversation like it was normal. Then he looked back at James and his tone sharpened, not louder, cleaner. "You must be out of your mind," Colin said. The words cracked through the living room with more force than shouting ever could, because they were plain and undeniable. James's jaw tightened. Vanessa's hand slipped off his arm like she didn't want to be touched to the moment anymore. People shifted their weight, eyes moving, pretending to look at food, pretending to adjust plates, pretending not to listen while listening harder than ever. Colin didn't stop there. He stepped closer, not into James's space, but into the center of the room where everyone could hear him without him performing. "And you're saying this so confidently," he added, voice low, "like you already decided your mother doesn't get to own her own life." James opened his mouth, ready to argue, ready to spin it back into "respect your elders" and "you don't understand." But Colin lifted one hand, not a threat, a stop sign. His eyes stayed locked on James's face. "No," Colin said, "don't talk." He turned slightly, scanning the room, letting everyone feel seen, then landed back on James. "You're going to show me the paperwork," he said. And the way he said it made the room go still again, because it wasn't a suggestion. It was a line being drawn. When Colin demanded the paperwork, the room didn't explode. It tightened. People didn't gasp out loud. They shifted. They stared at plates. They found reasons to move their hands, to stir drinks, to adjust napkins. Vanessa's family members, faces I didn't fully know, leaned back slightly like they didn't want their names attached to what was about to happen. James stood in the center of it all with his shoulders squared, the picture of a man who believed confidence could override truth. He glanced around the room, smiling like this was a misunderstanding he could laugh his way through. "Uncle Colin," he said with a little chuckle, "it's Christmas. You doing too much?" Colin didn't blink. "I'm asking about timing," he said, steady. "When did this happen?" James lifted his hands in that calm, rehearsed way he used when he wanted to sound reasonable. "It's been in the works," he answered. "Just family decisions. Nothing crazy." "In the works," Colin repeated, and the way he said it made it sound like a confession. He turned his head slightly, looking at Leonard now. Leonard's eyes dropped fast, like a man hoping the floor would open. "Leonard," Colin said, voice still controlled. "You know about this." Leonard cleared his throat and forced a small smile. "James said it was temporary," Leonard muttered. "Just for insurance." Colin looked back at James. "Temporary doesn't come with ownership," he said. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't perform. He spoke like a man who had handled real problems before and didn't need drama to solve them. "So, I'll ask again," he continued. "When did you decide your mother doesn't drive anymore? And who told Patricia that?" James's laugh came out sharper this time, not playful. "She don't drive like that," he said, shrugging. "Everybody knows that. She be in the house." My stomach twisted, not because the words were new, because the casualness was. He said it like my life was a rumor he had the right to spread. Vanessa stepped in quickly, voice sweet, trying to soften the edges. "Colin," she said, "it was just a practical solution. My mom was struggling, and James didn't want Rose stressed with all the insurance stuff." Colin held up a hand again. Not rude, final. "I'm not asking you," Colin said, still calm. "I'm asking him." James's eyes flashed. "Why you acting like I stole something?" he snapped, then caught himself, smoothing his tone back down. "Look, the car was sitting. My mother doesn't need it. And if anything happens, everybody will be looking at us. I'm protecting her." Protecting. The word rolled out of his mouth like a shield. Colin tilted his head slightly, studying James like he was seeing him clearly for the first time. "Protecting her would have been keeping it in her driveway and letting her drive it," Colin said. "Protecting her would have been making sure nobody speaks for her." James's jaw tightened. He glanced at me and I felt it. His expectation that I would rescue him by playing peacemaker, by saying something soft that would let everyone exhale. I didn't. I stayed still, my hands relaxed at my sides, my face calm. Not because I was numb, because I was done being used as the cushion between men's decisions and everyone's comfort. A woman near the dining table murmured, "Let's just eat," as if food could fix disrespect. Someone else laughed nervously. James seized on it. "Exactly," he said, turning his smile toward the room. "Let's eat. Uncle Colin, always dramatic." The word dramatic hung in the air, aimed at Colin, but meant for me too. The usual trick. Label the person asking questions as the problem. Colin didn't take the bait. He didn't argue about the label. He went straight back to the point. "You said your mother-in-law owns it," he said. "That's a serious word, so show me the documents." James rolled his eyes like a teenager. "Man, I don't have paperwork on me," he said. "It's handled." Colin's gaze didn't move. "Where is it handled?" he asked. "Who handled it?" James hesitated for the first time all night. It was small, barely visible, but I saw it. His eyes flicked to Vanessa. Vanessa's chin lifted slightly, a silent message. "Don't say too much." James swallowed. "It's in the house," he said finally, vague. Colin nodded once. "Go get it," he said. James's laugh returned, louder, defensive. "I'm not going to fetch papers like some child in front of everybody," he said. "You tripping." Colin didn't react. He looked at James the way a father looks at a grown man who still thinks disrespect is a joke. Then he did something that changed the room without raising his voice at all. He reached into his pocket, pulled out his phone, and unlocked it slowly. Not threatening, not dramatic, just deliberate. He looked at the screen for a second, then looked up at James. "I'm going to verify something," Colin said. That was all. No speech, no promise. Just that one sentence that sounded like a door closing. James's smile finally disappeared. Vanessa's face tightened like she'd tasted metal. Leonard shifted uncomfortably, eyes darting. The room went quiet enough that the holiday music sounded too cheerful, too wrong. Colin slid his phone back into his pocket, then turned toward me. His eyes softened for a moment. Not pity, respect. Then he looked back at James, one last time. "Enjoy your dinner," he said, flat, and he walked to the door. James took a step after him. "Uncle Colin." Colin didn't turn around. He opened the door and stepped out into the cold night like he was leaving behind something contaminated. The door shut with a final click that made my heart beat once, hard. James stood frozen in the entryway, staring at the closed door like he had just watched Control walk out of his house. The day after Christmas dinner, the house felt hungover without the comfort of laughter to justify it. Wrapping paper sat in a bag by the trash, like evidence nobody wanted to look at. Leonard moved slower than usual, like the silence had weight now. James didn't come by. Vanessa didn't send her cheerful little messages. The quiet was different. No longer staged, no longer polite. It was cautious. The kind of quiet that shows up when people realize a line has been crossed and the person who noticed it isn't playing along anymore. I was folding a dish towel at the kitchen counter when James finally called. His name flashed on my screen and my stomach tightened. Not because I expected an apology, but because I could already hear the edge in his breathing before I answered. "Ma," he said the second I picked up, and his voice sounded tight, controlled, like he'd been walking around with anger pressed under his tongue. "Did Uncle Colin call somebody?" I didn't ask what he meant. I didn't pretend confusion. I simply held the phone in my hand and listened to the way my son now spoke to me like I was connected to something dangerous. "I don't know who your uncle called," I said. My voice stayed even. "You saw him leave," James scoffed. "Nah, this don't make sense," he snapped. Then he caught himself and lowered his voice as if calm could erase what he'd just revealed. "I just got a call," he said. "Somebody asking questions." "Who?" I asked. "Some office," he replied, impatient. "I don't know. Some lady talking all calm like she wasn't stirring up mess. Talking about the vehicle." My fingers tightened around the phone. "What did she ask?" I said. James exhaled hard. "She asked me to confirm information," he said, "like I'm some criminal." He raised his voice slightly on that last word, and I could hear Vanessa in the background saying something low, something sharp, like she was coaching him. James pulled away from her voice and came back to me. "They said something about the title," he continued, "like there's confusion, like it's not clear." Not clear. The phrase slid under my skin. I pictured that folder in James's hands. I pictured how fast he closed it, how he never left me a copy. "What did you tell them?" I asked. James laughed once, harsh. "I told them the truth," he said, "that the car is being used by family, that everything is handled." There it was again, handled. The word people use when they don't want to show proof. "And what did they say?" I asked. James went quiet for a moment. In that pause, I heard something I hadn't heard from him in a long time, uncertainty. Then he spoke, voice lower now, like he didn't want to repeat it out loud because repeating it would make it real. "She said I need to clarify documentation," he admitted. "She said if the vehicle is in somebody else's possession and somebody's claiming ownership, there needs to be paperwork that matches that." His words were rushed, like he was trying to get through the sentence without letting it pierce him. And then she started talking about how I should bring records, like I'm supposed to pull up papers like this is court or something. Court. He didn't mean court literally. He meant consequences. He meant the kind of seriousness that doesn't care about family excuses. "James," I said, slow, "do you have the paperwork you told everybody about?" His breath hit the phone like a hiss. "Ma, don't start," he warned. "Don't do that. Do that. Ask for proof." "I'm asking you a simple thing," I said. "You told the room your mother-in-law owns it. You told me it's on paper, so do you have it?" James didn't answer directly. He talked around it, the way people do when they're searching for ground that isn't there. Look, it's handled," he repeated. "Vanessa's mom got it situated. There's paperwork somewhere. Uncle Colin had no right calling people. He trying to embarrass me." The word embarrass came out with heat, not guilt, not concern for me. Embarrass, like his dignity mattered more than my ownership. I felt something settle in my chest. Cold, steady. This wasn't about helping Patricia. This was about James needing to feel big and being willing to shrink me to do it. "James," I said quietly, "nobody can embarrass you with the truth." Silence. Then his voice rose again, defensive, sharp. "Man, you always—" Vanessa's voice cut in the background, louder now. "Tell her to stop acting like a victim," she snapped, and then she must have realized I could hear, because the next words came muffled as James moved the phone. My stomach clenched. James came back on the line with forced calm. "Ma," he said, "I'm asking you, did you tell Uncle Colin something? Did you put him on this?" I looked around my kitchen, my clean counters, my folded towels, the calm life I'd built with my own hands, and I realized James had started seeing my quiet as a weakness he could use. Now he was seeing it as a threat. "I didn't put your uncle on anything," I said. "He heard you speak." James inhaled sharply like he was swallowing rage. "All right," he said, clipped. "Well, they told me I need to come in and clarify documentation. So if you got anything you signed, you need to find it." I almost laughed, but no sound came out. Find it. Like I hadn't already told him I had no copy. Like he wasn't the one who took it. "I don't have anything," I said. "You took it." Another pause. He didn't deny it. That was the loudest thing he'd said all day. "Just look," he muttered finally. "This is getting out of hand. I'm going to handle it." His voice tried to sound confident again, but the crack was there. "Handle it," I repeated softly, "with paperwork." James didn't respond. He ended the call abruptly, the line going dead in my ear. I stood in my kitchen with the phone still pressed to my cheek, feeling the air change around me. For the first time in weeks, James wasn't acting like he owned the situation. He was acting like he had to prove he did. James showed up at my house 2 evenings later with the kind of energy that tries to look calm but can't hide the panic underneath. He didn't knock the way he used to. He tapped twice, quick, impatient, like he owned the door and just needed it opened. When I let him in, he walked past me without greeting, phone in his hand, eyes moving like he was tracking a problem he couldn't control. Vanessa followed behind him, lips pressed together, face too composed for somebody who claimed this was family help. Leonard was in the living room again, television low, pretending he didn't hear the footsteps. I didn't invite James to sit. I stood near the hallway and watched him pace the kitchen like it was his office. "Ma," he started, not looking at me, "we need to fix this." Fix. That word always came when somebody wanted me to do the cleaning for their mess. "Fix what?" I asked. James stopped pacing long enough to look at me, and his eyes were sharp. "You know what?" he said. "These calls, these questions, they're making it look like I did something wrong." Vanessa let out a small breath through her nose, a sound that wasn't quite a laugh, but wasn't far from it. "He's being targeted," she said, voice smooth like she was speaking to a child, "because people don't understand the situation." "People," I repeated softly, "or paperwork." James's jaw tightened. "Ma, don't do that," he warned. "Don't get smart now. I'm trying to handle this before it turns into a problem." He held his phone up like proof. "They want me to bring documents. They asking me questions I shouldn't even have to answer." He stepped closer, lowering his voice the way he did when he wanted me to feel like we were on the same side. "All you gotta do is tell them it was your idea." Vanessa nodded once, approving, like this was the reasonable path. "Just say you wanted Patricia to have it for a while," she added. "Say you didn't want to drive it anymore, that's all." The words hit me slow, and my stomach went cold, not because it was shocking, because it was familiar. "You want me to lie?" I said plainly. James's face tightened in irritation. "It's not a lie," he snapped, then softened quickly when he saw my expression. "It's wording. It's cleaning it up. Ma, you always want peace. This is peace." Vanessa's eyes stayed on me, calm, watching to see if that word would work again. Leonard's television clicked quieter in the other room, like he could feel the tension pressing toward him and was trying to shrink from it. I looked at my son, grown, confident, still trying to use my values against me, and something inside me shifted, not into rage, into clarity. "James," I said, "peace that costs me my truth isn't peace." He blinked, then laughed once, harsh. "So you want to ruin your own son," he said. Vanessa stepped in quickly, voice sweet again. "Rose, don't be dramatic," she said. "Nobody's ruining anybody. We're just trying to prevent this from getting bigger than it has to be." Bigger. That was the word that told the truth. It was already bigger. That was why James's hands shook slightly when he tucked his phone into his pocket and pulled it out again, like he couldn't stand not holding something. "If you don't help me," James said, voice rising, "they're gonna think I did something to you. They're gonna think I pressured you. They're gonna think—" He stopped himself, eyes flicking toward Leonard's doorway. Leonard stayed seated, still, silent. James turned back to me, forcing calm. "Just say you understood what you signed," he said. "Say you agreed." My throat tightened. "I didn't understand," I said, "and you know that." Vanessa's politeness cracked for the first time. "You understood enough," she snapped, then caught herself and smoothed her face again. "You signed it. That means you agreed." James leaned forward, voice low, urgent. "Ma, please," he said, and the desperation in that word wasn't love. It was self-preservation. "Just fix it. Say it was fine. Say it was family. They'll drop it." That was when the front door opened behind them, and Colin walked in without asking, like blood had rights that excuses didn't. He stopped in the entryway and looked at the scene. James standing close to me, Vanessa hovering, Leonard silent in the living room. Colin's eyes moved from my face to James's, and something in his expression hardened into certainty. "Now I see it," Colin said quietly. James spun around, defensive. "Uncle Colin, you—" Colin lifted a hand. "No," he said, "don't." He looked at me. "He's pressuring you to lie," Colin said, not a question. I didn't answer with words. I just held Colin's gaze and let him read the truth in my stillness. Colin turned back to James and his tone sharpened, still low but final. "This is undue influence," Colin said. The words landed like a gavel in my kitchen. Vanessa's face changed instantly, tight, alarmed. James scoffed loudly, trying to laugh it off. "Man, what is you talking about?" he snapped. "This is my mother." "Exactly," Colin said. "That's why it's serious." Colin stepped closer, not threatening, controlled. "You took her car, you controlled the story, you withheld documents, and now you're in her house telling her to fix it by saying it was her idea." Colin's eyes didn't blink. "That's elder financial abuse," he said. The room went still. Leonard's television went silent completely, like even he couldn't hide behind sound anymore. James's mouth opened, then closed. Vanessa's hands clenched at her sides. The word abuse sat in the air like a stain. "Don't say that," Vanessa whispered. But it wasn't outrage. It was fear. James finally found his voice, loud and shaking. "This is crazy," he barked. "You're trying to make me a criminal." Colin didn't flinch. He pulled his phone from his pocket and held it up. "It's not up to me," he said. "They opened an investigation this afternoon." The first meeting wasn't dramatic. That was what made it terrifying. No raised voices, no courtroom, no flashing lights. Just a plain office with beige walls, a desk that had seen 1,000 worries, and a woman with calm eyes who spoke like she had learned to stay steady when families tried to spin. Colin drove me there because Leonard said he had things to handle, and James didn't call at all. I sat in the passenger seat, watching the road slide past, feeling something unfamiliar in my chest. Relief mixed with grief. Relief that I wasn't walking into it alone. Grief that I ever had to walk into it at all. Colin kept both hands on the steering wheel and didn't talk much. He didn't fill the air with comforting lies. He let me feel what I needed to feel without trying to shrink it. When we arrived, Colin parked and got out first. He opened my door and offered a hand, not because I needed help, but because he wanted everyone who saw us to understand I was not isolated. Inside, the waiting area smelled like coffee and printer ink. A few chairs, a water cooler, a small sign reminding people to speak respectfully. I sat with my purse in my lap like it was armor. Colin sat beside me close enough that I could feel his presence as a shield. A woman stepped into the doorway and called my name. Rose Owens? Her voice was neutral, professional. I stood and followed her into a small office. She didn't invite Colin out. She nodded at him. "He can stay," she said, and the way she said it made something in me loosen. I sat down. Colin sat beside me. The woman, she introduced herself and slid a folder onto her desk, looked at me with the kind of calm that doesn't judge, but doesn't excuse either. "Mrs. Owens," she began, "I'm going to ask you some questions. Some may feel uncomfortable. I'm not here to shame you. I'm here to understand what happened." I nodded once. My throat was tight. She opened the folder and pulled out a document. "Do you recognize this?" she asked, turning it toward me. My stomach dropped before my eyes even focused. The header. My name typed in clean letters. The signature at the bottom that looked like mine because it was mine. My fingers went cold. "Yes," I whispered. Colin's jaw tightened beside me, but he didn't interrupt. The woman didn't react emotionally. She simply asked, "When did you sign?" I gave the approximate day, and she wrote it down. "Who was present?" she asked. "My son," I said, "and my daughter-in-law." Her pen moved. "Was your husband present?" she asked. "He was in the house," I answered, "but not in the room." She paused just long enough to make me feel the weight of it, then nodded and wrote again. "Did you have an attorney?" "No." "Did anyone advise you to get one?" "No." "Were you given a copy?" My cheeks burned. "No." She looked up then, not shocked, just attentive. "Did you ask for one?" I swallowed. "I didn't think I had to," I admitted. "It was my son." The woman nodded slowly, not pitying me, simply marking the pattern. "Did anyone explain the document to you in full before you signed?" "No." "Did you read it?" "Not all of it." The silence that followed wasn't judgment. It was the sound of paperwork becoming what it was meant to be. Memory. The woman turned another page and pointed to a section with her pen. "This," she said, "is not an insurance form." She didn't say it like a gotcha. She said it like a fact. My stomach clenched. Colin's shoulders shifted slightly, but he stayed quiet. "This document indicates a transfer of interest connected to the vehicle," she continued. My mouth went dry. I stared at the page, the words blurring. Transfer, interest, connected. They weren't words I used in my daily life. They were words somebody used around me while I held a pen and trusted them. I pressed my lips together, trying not to show the humiliation crawling up my throat. The woman flipped to another page. "There is no record of independent counsel," she said. "No record that you were advised separately. No record of you receiving copies." She looked at Colin briefly, then back to me. "And there's a concern about how the vehicle was removed from your possession." Removed. Not borrowed, not parked. Removed. I sat very still. "He told people I don't drive anymore," I said quietly. "He told my daughter-in-law's mother it fit her better." The woman nodded and wrote, "Did you consent to someone else claiming ownership?" "No." "Did you benefit from the arrangement?" "No." "Did it restrict your access?" I thought of the taxi, the walking, the waiting. "Yes." The woman placed her pen down for the first time, folding her hands. "I need you to understand something," she said gently. "Paperwork remembers what people try to rewrite." My chest tightened, and I blinked hard. Colin's hand rested near my elbow, not touching, just there. The woman slid the document back into the folder and closed it. "At this point, she said. "We're reviewing the validity of the transfer process and the circumstances around it." She didn't promise outcomes. She didn't threaten anyone. "A determination is pending," she said. James tried to fix it the same way he had done everything else, by controlling the room, controlling the story, controlling the language. He sent messages that sounded like concern but carried instruction. He called Leonard more than he called me, as if speaking through his father would make me softer. Vanessa started sending polite texts again, little hearts and checking on you like kindness could rewind what had already been said. But the system didn't respond to tone. It responded to records, and records don't care who smiles prettiest at Christmas dinner. The determination came on a Tuesday afternoon, delivered without drama. Colin called me first, voice calm. "They finalized it," he said. My stomach tightened. "Finalized what?" I asked, even though my body already knew. Colin paused, then said it clearly. "The transfer is being reversed." The word reversed landed in my chest like air returning to lungs I didn't realize I'd been holding. For a second, I couldn't speak. The silence on my end wasn't hesitation. It was relief trying to find a shape that didn't look like victory. "What does that mean?" I whispered. "It means," Colin said, "the vehicle goes back under your control. It means the paperwork that was used against you is being treated like what it was." He didn't say stolen. He didn't say fraud. He stayed measured. Then his voice tightened just slightly. "And there are penalties." I swallowed. I didn't feel joy. I felt something steadier, consequences, real ones. When I hung up, I stood in my kitchen for a long moment staring at my hands. They looked the same. That was the strange part. All that happened, and my hands still looked like hands. But inside, something had shifted from pleading to firm ground. Leonard came in from the living room a few minutes later, like he could sense the air had changed. He didn't ask what was wrong the way he used to when he wanted me to reassure him. He just stood there, waiting. "Colin called," I said. Leonard's eyes widened slightly. "About what?" he asked, though his voice sounded like he already knew. "The car," I replied. "They reversed it." Leonard's shoulders dropped as if a burden had been lifted off him, and the sight of that relief made my throat tighten. He had been comfortable letting me carry this alone, but the moment consequences touched the family name, his body reacted. "Thank God," he whispered. Then he looked at me like he expected me to join him in gratitude. I didn't. "There are penalties," I added. That stopped him. "Penalties," he repeated, as if the word didn't belong in our home. "For who?" he asked. "James," I said. Leonard went still. The television in the other room kept murmuring, but it sounded far away, like it belonged to a different house. "Rose," he started, and then stopped. He didn't have a speech. He didn't have a defense. He didn't have a way to make it light. His eyes flicked toward the window, toward the driveway that had been empty for weeks, and I saw something in his face that I hadn't seen before. Shame. Not the kind that performs, the kind that sits heavy because it knows it waited too long. The doorbell rang later that afternoon. Not a dramatic pounding, just two firm presses. Leonard flinched like the sound had teeth. When he opened the door, James stood there with Vanessa behind him, both of them dressed like they were going somewhere official. James's face was tight, jaw clenched, eyes sharp. Vanessa's expression was composed, but her hands were clasped too tightly, knuckles pale. James walked in without waiting for permission, straight into my living room like he could still claim space by force of habit. "So," he said, voice clipped, "you happy now?" Leonard stepped forward, raising his hand slightly, a peacemaker's reflex. "James, calm down," he murmured. James ignored him and stared at me like I had betrayed him. "You let Colin do this," James accused. "You let him call them people and make it seem like I'm some—" He stopped himself, breath shaking. Vanessa stepped in quickly, voice soft, strategic. "Rose, we just want to talk," she said. "This has gone too far. Too far. Like I was the one who pushed it." I stayed calm. "What do you want?" I asked. James pulled a folded paper from his coat pocket and slapped it onto the coffee table. The sound cracked through the room, sharper than yelling. "This," he said. "They saying the transfer is invalid. They saying I'm responsible for fees. They talking about consequences." His voice rose on that last word, anger cracking into fear. He looked at Leonard. "Dad, say something," he demanded. Leonard opened his mouth, and then he closed it again. I watched my husband's face in that moment, the moment he finally understood that silence doesn't protect anyone when the truth comes in writing. Leonard's eyes were wet, but he didn't cry, he didn't plead. He just stood there like a man who had spent weeks choosing peace over his wife, and now the cost was standing in front of him, wearing his son's face. "Son," Leonard said finally, voice low, "you shouldn't have done it." That was all. James's face twisted like he had been slapped. Vanessa's composure cracked for a second, her eyes darting, calculating. James turned back to me, rage trembling beneath his words. "You could have stopped this," he hissed. I held his gaze and spoke calmly. "I tried to stop it when I asked for my keys," I said. "You didn't listen." James snatched the paper back up and stormed toward the door. Vanessa followed, lips tight, eyes down. Leonard didn't move. He didn't chase. After the door shut, the house felt larger, emptier, honest in a way it hadn't been in weeks. Leonard sat down slowly, head in his hands, and for the first time, I didn't rush to comfort him. I let him sit in the cost. My phone buzzed in my pocket a moment later, a text from Colin. "You okay? I'm close if you need me." The SUV came back on a quiet morning, the kind of morning where the sun looks ordinary and the air feels clean enough to lie. I heard the engine before I saw it, a familiar low hum pulling into my driveway like a memory returning to its rightful place. Leonard was in the kitchen making coffee, moving carefully, like the house still didn't know what it was allowed to be after everything that happened. When the tires rolled over the edge of the driveway, he froze, mug halfway to his mouth. I walked to the front window and watched. A man I didn't know stepped out, clipboard in hand, professional and neutral. He looked around once, then glanced at the vehicle like it was just another job. The SUV sat there shining like nothing had ever happened to it, like it hadn't lived in another woman's driveway while I walked my own streets with my purse tight on my shoulder. I opened the front door and stepped onto the porch. The man nodded politely. "Mrs. Owens?" he asked. I nodded once. He handed me a set of keys, my keys, and a thin folder. "You'll find the confirmation inside," he said. "No congratulations, no judgment, just closure delivered like mail." I took the keys and felt the weight of them settle in my palm in a way that made my chest tighten. Not because I missed driving, because I missed being believed. The man asked me to sign a receipt line, and I did it with a steady hand, my signature clean, deliberate, mine. When he left, I stood on the porch for a long moment looking at the SUV, letting the quiet wash over me. Leonard came to the doorway behind me, hovering like he didn't know if he had the right to stand beside me in this moment. He didn't speak. His silence wasn't avoidance now, it was regret. That was the difference. I turned the keys in my hand once, listening to the small click of metal, and felt something settle deeper than anger. Ownership isn't just possession, it's dignity. It's the right to move without asking. Leonard cleared his throat softly. You want me to go with you?" he asked, voice small. The question surprised me, not because it was kind, but because it was late. I looked at him and saw the truth written in the lines of his face. He had thought staying quiet would keep the family intact. Instead, it had almost cost me my place inside it. "No," I said gently. "I'm going alone." Leonard nodded once, swallowing hard, and stepped back. I walked down the porch steps and toward the SUV. The paint caught the morning light and made it look almost new. I slid my hand over the hood, feeling the cold smoothness under my fingertips, and the flash of memory hit me. Colin in that dealership with me, laughing, telling me to get what I wanted because I had earned it. I opened the driver's side door and sat down, breathing in the scent inside. It still smelled faintly like my perfume and leather conditioner. My hands found the steering wheel, and I held it for a second without turning. The key, letting my body remember what it felt like to be in control. I started the engine and listened, steady, strong, not roaring, not showing off, just present. I pulled out of the driveway and drove toward the grocery store, not because I needed anything urgent, but because I wanted my first drive back to be something ordinary. That's what James never understood. A woman like me doesn't need grand gestures. I need my normal life back in my own hands. At the store, I parked clean between the lines and walked inside. I didn't hurry. I didn't hide. I bought oranges, bread, and a small bunch of flowers I didn't plan for. At the checkout, the cashier smiled and said, "Merry Christmas." A little late. I smiled back. "Merry Christmas," I replied, and the words felt different this time. Not forced, not performative, just quiet and true. When I returned home, Colin's car was already in my driveway. He leaned against his door with his arms crossed, watching my SUV like he was checking that reality had finally caught up. When I stepped out, he smiled slightly, not proud, relieved. "There she is," he said. I nodded, and something in my throat tightened. "Thank you," I told him, and my voice almost cracked on the last word, not from weakness, but from the relief of not being alone. Colin shook his head once. "Don't thank me," he said. "Thank the truth. It just needed somebody to speak it out loud." I looked toward my front door where Leonard stood inside the glass, watching. He didn't wave. He didn't step out. He just watched like a man trying to learn how to be present in a way that costs him something. Colin followed my gaze. "He's going to have to live with it," Colin said quietly. "That's his work." I nodded. "I'm not carrying it anymore," I replied. Colin's eyes softened, and he reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone. "James called me last night," he said. "Wanted to talk." I didn't ask what James said. I already knew the shape of it. Deflection, blame, wounded pride. "And?" I asked. Colin shrugged slightly. "I told him the same thing I told him at Christmas," he said. "Show the paper, live with the truth." He paused, then looked at me carefully. "How you holding up?" I took a slow breath and looked at my SUV again, back where it belonged, not as a trophy, but as a boundary. I felt no urge to call James, no urge to send paragraphs, no urge to prove my love by absorbing his disrespect. I felt relief, pure, clean relief. And underneath it, something I didn't expect, satisfaction. Not because my son suffered, but because my son learned that my silence was not his inheritance. I looked at Colin and let the truth come out exactly as it was. "I didn't win," I said softly. "I stopped being used."
I'd really appreciate your support. Please subscribe and leave a comment. May God bless you.